Yeah, that's
right?
nice. Women can be a labor force if men allow them to. That's fantastic.
Sure. And what I'm saying, you can say if men allow that, however you want to say it or whatever, but the reality is at the end of the day, it's not just men, right? You need both halves of society working together to actually accomplish anything. So there is no society or country that's like...
You're smuggling in just men, again. You're smuggling in just men. What I'm saying to you specifically is that men are the enforcement arm, and nobody's building if men say no. That's what I'm saying. Women aren't going to be able to go to men and say, no, you know what? We're going to do it anyway if men don't want them to, Destiny. That's the distinction.
This debate between Andrew Wilson and Destiny really dives deep into the role of men in society, especially when it comes to rights, power, and enforcement. Andrew Wilson brings up the idea that men are the rights givers because they make up the enforcement side of any functioning society. Meanwhile, Destiny tries to break it down with hypotheticals and exceptions, but it kind of comes off like he's dodging the bigger picture. What follows is a heated back and forth where Andrew Wilson keeps hammering home his point while Destiny sort of spirals into what ifs and side arguments. Let's break it down with some lifestyle reactions.
You say it's not masculine men who are defending these rights. However, it is masculine men who are in the military, in law enforcement, things like this, who are the enforcement arm of these rights, who these government institutions rely heavily on in order to enforce what their will is. So always does come down to enforcement.
Do you think then that the countries where women have the most rights are the countries with the most masculine, strong men?
So they're not mutually exclusive or non-exclusive.
I didn't say they're mutually exclusive. I'm asking because you make it sound like it's just strong men that grant rights. So does that mean that if I were to look at all the women's rights in the world,
there's a problem there. There's a smuggling again where you say strong masculine men are the only ones doing them. Just saying men is the default are the ones who are doing this.
Wait, but why do you say men are the default? Like we can run that back a little bit more reductively. Shouldn't it be 6 feet or taller men? Like don't all men that are 5'8" and lower get their rights from men that are 6 feet and taller?
No.
Why not?
Because they don't have a non-equalization on force. A 5'8" person can defend themselves against a 6-foot person.
In general, do you think that's true?
I don't know about you guys, but like the fact that Andrew Wilson even has to answer this kind of random height example is kind of wild. He's clearly trying to talk about average force and how men as a group are the ones who enforce rights. But Destiny's over here like, what if a short guy fights a tall guy? Like, bro, this ain't WWE. Andrew Wilson's making a point about broad patterns in society, and Destiny's nitpicking a one-on-one street fight scenario.
I think that there are some advantages, but if you're going to do that, then on average...
Well, no, not some advantages. I'm saying on average, if we look at combat sports with no weight classes, you think 5'8" men are defending
themselves? Well, hang on. So if we're going to use averages, then let's use averages and say that we have an average for a reason because most men are inside of that average, right? So if that's true, then most of the men who would be falling in these jobs are going to be within that average, Destiny. So
sure, but I'm just asking if we run this all the way back. So any man that's below the average height, any man that's 5'9" or lower, their rights are also being defended by men that are 6'2" and taller.
Well, no, that wouldn't be a direct correlate for equalization because men who are 6 foot, because men who are 6 foot, there's far fewer of them than men who are in the average aggregate. So therefore, the force equalization is different. However, if you're looking at the force differential from men to women, the average is so lopsided that even weak men can generally defend themselves fairly well against strong women.
If you want to do force equalization there, then shouldn't we be looking at people that prefer a heavily patriarchal society versus people that prefer a more egalitarian one? And the force equalization for women on the egalitarian one would be probably that most men would side with that over the ones that want the heavily patriarchal one?
Yeah, but that would go with my point, which is that men are the ones who are the rights givers.
But men aren't just the rights givers there, because a coalition of 5'9" and shorter men with women are probably going to defend rights more than a coalition of 6 foot plus alpha men.
But the distinction there is that you said it yourself, it would be a coalition of men and women, but it'll never be women. So it'll always have to be men.
And it'll never be 5'8" and lower men, I don't think,
no,
right?
It will always be.
Yeah, okay, see, this is where Andrew Wilson just nails it. Like, I don't think people want to hear it, but he's not wrong. When stuff really hits the fan, it's the men that step in. And not just any men, all men. Doesn't matter if they're tall, short, whatever. It's not like there's a moment in history where just women were like, don't worry, guys, we got this war. I mean, come on. Andrew Wilson is just telling the truth, even if it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, the default will always go to men. Men can always enforce their rights collectively.
Okay, so you just want to arbitrarily cut it off at just men, but not go into any of the delineations.
I just went into every delineation with you. Which one would you like to go into?
I mean, I already said it. I think that you could argue that like taller men are the ones that run society, and shorter men only exist in society essentially at the behest of larger men, basically.
Yeah, but we just covered this. That's true. You could say that, but if you're looking at an average, then you're saying that the men who are outside of the average are fewer in number than the men who are in the average. So they're outnumbered. So I don't know what your point is.
I mean, it could be the slightly taller men could probably take on 1.5 shorter men. I'm sure we could find some average.
So, I mean, yeah, Destiny is just getting ridiculous here. Like, bro, what are we even talking about at this point? 1.5 shorter men? What? Andrew Wilson is staying locked in on the point that men in general carry the weight when it comes to societal enforcement. But Destiny's out here doing made-up math to prove what exactly? It's kind of obvious he's grasping at straws right here.
Where 30% of men in society can run the other 70%.
And it's still
just
men.
like nobody looks at...
And it's still men.
Sure.
That's the point.
It is men, but now I'm going into height. But you want to go back on just the man, the fact that it's like the man thing. But again, and to go very broad, because now, I mean, I feel like we kind of see how ridiculous the argument is, and just like saying, just men.
I haven't heard you refute it.
Broadly speaking, right, it's hard to refute because it's almost unfalsifiable because you're talking about half the population of the planet, right? Like, how am I supposed to refute that men are important in guarding rights? There are no countries that exist without men. But when I try to think of like, well, what's the refutation of this? Here would be an interesting thing. Do the countries with the strongest men have the most rights? Not really, no. In fact, just the opposite. I remember hearing so many jokes about how because Russia is so masculine and manly that all the trans Ukrainian soldiers were going to be getting murdered by the brave Russian soldiers. And here we've got drone operators, tossing grenades on Russian troops blowing themselves, right? So it doesn't seem to be the case that like just strong men are the predictor of rights.
So hang on, wait a second.
Go for it.
So men can take your rights away in those other countries too?
No, not just men. Those countries can take your rights away. You need a whole
institution. Using the enforcement arm of who? Which sex do you think is the enforcement arm?
Countries are powered by men and women. When the Soviet Union
is the enforcement
Nazi
arm?
Germany, when the Soviet, it's not just about the enforcement arm. Who's giving them the arms to enforce?
Usually other men.
Who manufactures the guns? Who manufactures?
Do you think that there's female gun makers all over the world or what?
Andrew Wilson absolutely wrecked him. Like, Destiny tried to pull the old "but women worked in factories" card, and Andrew Wilson just shot it down like it was nothing. Like, bro, putting screws in a metal frame and designing or manufacturing weapons at scale are not the same thing. Andrew Wilson brought that heat and didn't even blink. Destiny just sounded mad at that point.
Yeah, who do you think was working production in World War II when all of our men were going overseas?
They weren't designing the guns. They were literally on an assembly line putting a screw in a piece of metal. They weren't designing weapons. What world do you live in?
That's great. And at the end of the day, both jobs matter. You could be the best engineer in the world. If you don't have somebody building your doesn't fucking matter.
Yeah, that's
right?
nice. Women can be a labor force if men allow them to. That's fantastic.
Sure. And what I'm saying, you can say if men allow them to, however you want to say it or whatever, but the reality is at the end of the day, it's not just men, right? You need both halves of society working together to actually accomplish anything. So there is no society or country that's like...
You're smuggling in just men again. You're smuggling in just men. What I'm saying to you specifically is that men are the enforcement arm, and nobody's building if men say no. That's what I'm saying. Women aren't going to be able to go to men and say, no, you know what? We're going to do it anyway if men don't want them to, Destiny. That's the distinction.
This whole debate, yeah. Andrew Wilson walked in with facts and left with the mic. Destiny tried every trick in the book, jokes, hypotheticals, even some slick sarcasm, but none of it stuck. Andrew Wilson stayed on message, kept it real, and made it clear that you can't talk about rights and power in society without admitting that men, like it or not, are the backbone of that enforcement. Destiny looked more confused with every passing minute. So yeah, this wasn't just a debate. Andrew Wilson straight up wrecked Destiny. So, I mean, yeah, Destiny's just getting ridiculous here. Like, bro, what are we even talking about at this point? 1.5 shorter men? What? Andrew Wilson is staying locked in on the point that men in general carry the weight when it comes to societal enforcement. But Destiny's out here doing made-up math to prove what exactly? It's kind of obvious he's grasping at straws right here.